Good afternoon um, to this afternoon's noon meeting, and thank you for joining the noon meeting, which will be presented by Dr. Kevin Winter, who's from the Department of Environmental and Geographical Sciences and also senior member of the Future Water Institute. The title of his presentation is Learning in an Urban Living Lab, Interconnecting Health and the Environment, which is a very interesting work that Kevin is doing, looking at the reuse of technologies for the reuse of contaminated water. So I'll put you over to Kevin. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Akil, and good afternoon to all of you. I promise not to use up your whole lunchtime meeting, so it's a fairly short presentation. In fact, it's in the form of a short video, and from there is a question or two that will arise out of an interest which I hope will either inspire or maybe in some cases put you off of running and managing a living lab and what we learn from a living lab. And so I'm going to give you an overview through the video, which we hope it all works in terms of technology here, and then some discussion that follows from there. And it's quite short and enough to be able to see whether there's an interest that flows from this and perhaps particular questions that arise from managing the challenge of doing research in this particular context. And there are loads of questions. So let me introduce the actual video and let you watch that for a while. And it's a short 5-minute video that we put together, and it'll give an overview of what we've done, and then we'll raise the questions afterwards. And we'll try and do it in an interactive way. And in fact, I set up a little Mentimeter question for you so we can have lots of participation in answering that question. But as you watch the context, think about research and learning through a living lab and see whether that begins to spark some reaction from you. Let me turn to the video straight away.
The Water Hub is an urban living lab where we are learning how to work with nature rather than against it. The site is situated about 80 kilometers east of Cape Town in the beautiful valley of Franschhoek on an abandoned wastewater treatment works. It's very seldom that a wastewater treatment plant is ever abandoned anywhere in the world, and it gave us the opportunity to turn the site into a surface water recovery centre. It is also situated in a context that represents a microcosm of South Africa's socio-economic and spatial history. Not more than 1 kilometre away and upslope the site is an informal settlement where more than 5,000 people struggle to live in a poorly serviced settlement. Surface water runoff from the settlement flows through the research site. It's a darker shade of grey and is heavily polluted with excess bacteria, nutrients, and some things that we can't see or even measure. Researchers at the site are using nature-based processes to clean this water and then use it to irrigate vegetables. Recovering resources from polluted water and reusing this productively is an obvious step in the right direction. The work started with the polluted river that runs through the site. It is high in nutrients, and this got us thinking, what if we could use that water with its chemical load to reduce the concentrations and safely reuse the water with a smaller portion of liquid fertilizer? The Future Water Institute at the University of Cape Town and partners began by converting the old drying beds into biofiltration cells. We filled these large beds with different sources of natural media, large and small stones, peach pips, and then grew plants on top of some of these cells, much like a constructed wetland. Polluted water was pumped from the river and into each cell. 2 years later, and we now have some exciting results. For example, ammonia is reduced by between 70 and 90%. It is removed by bacteria deep inside the cell. We use this treated water to safely irrigate plants. The irrigation water passes through a series of tanks. These tanks look like they contain green slime, but it is really a useful duckweed that reduces potassium concentrations and provides compost for the soil. We found ways of using nature to treat water without adding chemicals, but we also wanted to learn more about how nature-based processes can support food gardens. These are permaculture gardens. The compost machine in the center contains organic waste and duckweed. It releases nutrients into the soil and is used to grow the vegetables. This is a large-scale experimental project that is bringing together researchers from different disciplines in a dynamic space. We are not only learning and testing nature-based solutions, but learning from each other and seeing the value of interdisciplinary collaboration. We are working to introduce a localized circular economy, and when you take on board this kind of holistic vision, then the research invites so many other questions. For instance, how do we treat high-quality organic waste as a resource for growing food, extracting energy, and adding value to water for irrigation? What you get is an exciting, challenging, and interdisciplinary space. For more information on the project, visit the website thewaterhub.org.za.
Well, thanks very much for sharing the screen and getting it going and helping me out with it. It's always helpful to have things sitting when you get technology crashes like that sitting on the web, in this case on YouTube. Let's stop for a moment and just see whether there are, or let me hear if there are any questions or comments. You've got an overview of just a small section of the Water Hub concept, but essentially it's around living labs we want to talk to today. And I wonder if there is, first of all, some comment or for some questions from folk. And don't be shy, just unmute your mic, and you don't have to show your face, just raise a question. Particularly the things that might have come through quite quickly in the video, and you may need a little more clarification.
Hi, this is Alea. I'm a first year MPH student in the environmental health track. This is really interesting, actually, especially in a water scarce kind of country like South Africa. I just wanted to find out more about the way the water was treated, because I know in the video they said no chemicals or something.
So one of the challenges, and a great question, thank you, and you've picked up, and that's what the video is tending to do, just to give a little snapshot of some things that will give you ideas that you can connect with. We use in an old wastewater treatment plant, as was explained in the video, and retrofitting that site. Living labs, by the way, are not only sites, and they are not only confined to research experiments happening on the site. So probably just as an introduction to answering your question. But on the site of an old wastewater treatment plant, and as I said in the video, as was commented to you, is that the wastewater treatment plants are seldom abandoned. They are always upgraded in some way. So it was an amazing opportunity to be able to go to a site which has typically been called or framed as a wastewater treatment area. And I mean, how is it possible that we're still talking about wastewater in 2020? We should be talking about how we recover resources from wastewater. We should be looking at how we treat that wastewater increasingly without chemicals, if we can. And also talking about water which doesn't necessarily have to always follow protocols of potable water, drinking water, and so on. How do we use this water for other purposes? So it's very important to realize that what we try to do here is to treat water without chemicals so that it is fit for irrigation standards and to meet irrigation standards. And we're doing that through large biofilters and learning, most of all, what a nature-based system does. So here we have very large drying beds, which are typical of an old wastewater treatment works. And what they used to do was to gather the sludge in these drying beds, wait for it to dry out, drain it, sometimes drain it directly into a nearby river, the liquids that is, and to take the solids to a landfill site and to dump it there. And you just can imagine how much resources were transported on the back of a truck, increasing the carbon footprint of that particular transport of material, and not actually to extract it. And of course, this kind of thinking has changed quite considerably. And one of the projects we're involved with is how do we start to treat water without adding more chemicals to it? How do we extract resources from that water and use it productively? And in this case, just to be able to remove sufficient nutrients so that we have essentially a liquid fertilizer that provides enough nitrogen, ammonia, phosphate for growing vegetables without being harmful to both soil and also to the crop produce as well. So there's a bit of a take on it. And you can see in one of those last little clips in the video, we're actually having to mimic that large biofilter in a laboratory in order to understand both discharge, detention time, and rate of flow, because those are crucial in enabling the microbial activity to do a lot of the work, which we believe is where, in essence, we should be focusing on in terms of water treatment. Understanding more about the microbial activity within these biofiltration cells. Does that help you? And thanks for your question, it was great.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, that answers my question. Thanks so much.
Don't be shy and raise a question if you wish to, and if need be, I'm also watching the chat as we go as well, so you can put something in there as well.
Hi, Kevin, could I ask a question? How does these, the water hub and kind of these labs, how do they impact the nearby communities? Are they involved in any way? Do you use some of these things, or in what way are they impacted?
Yeah, that's brilliant. So what you saw in the video, and that's the obvious question, you know, what happens after that? Here we are at UCT managing the research space within an old wastewater treatment works. How do other people interact with that? And what's the long-term value and benefit of this? And is there life after research? How does that begin to also be factored into the management of a living lab? And so the immediate answer is that we have had to spend quite a lot of time in trying to, first of all, get the water quality treated sufficiently so that we are confident about what is available and what's safely available to irrigate onto small gardens. We've done these as experimental gardens at this stage, and every time we harvest, we are analyzing the soil, we're analyzing the health of the crop as well. Now we're moving into probably the most exciting phase, and somewhat delayed by 6 months because of the COVID and lockdown conditions. But we're about to start a whole training for a small group of local growers. And I don't know if you appreciated that we were right next to an informal settlement about 1 kilometer upstream from the water hub. And there's a great deal of keenness to get involved in all of that. And obviously we can only work with a small number of people, but we have trainers in place right now. And also we are starting to roll out these gardens, and we're growing 5 crops in the next short little while, which includes potatoes and cabbages, carrots, and so on. And the idea is not to subsidize food on anyone's table. The idea is to try and get that food to such a quality that we can send it to the local market, which is the local town of Franschhoek and elsewhere, where most of the vegetables actually come into that town on the back of a truck. And so we're starting a small local circular economy. And most of all seen whether that circular economy idea can sort of break these legacies and chains, which will enable people through training and through better communication with the town and the water hub site, we can start to actually enable people to find an entry into a formal economy. That's the ideal, but essentially this is the moment in which we're starting to work with local growers, adults at this stage. And also some of the trainers are very keen to get children involved in this. And so there's an outreach now to one of the local schools to start showing how we can grow, very simply, how we can grow tomatoes and potatoes, for instance, in buckets right around your home very easily, provided that you've got compost and soil available. So it's a growing project, Aquil. We're trying to get there, but it's for me the moment that's probably for me the most exciting. The science and the technology is relatively simple because a lot of this is known. It's not known to us, but we're learning as we go and learning with different disciplines as we go as well. Now the next phase is going to be one in which I think the human resources are going to be both tested, but also a very exciting phase 2. And it makes the living lab much more of a contributor to a more social responsiveness in the community around us.
Thanks very much, Kevin. I think there's a question in the chat, Shahida.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just really looking at this question here from Shahida saying, how easy would it be to incorporate this type of process into existing wastewater treatment processes, given our outdated infrastructure? And you're right, there's lots of outdated infrastructure, which is simply taking sewage in, separating the solids from the liquids, and then dousing it, among other things, with chlorine. That chlorine escapes that wastewater treatment works and finds its way almost without fail into our river systems, and we then change the quality of that water further downstream. So I think that the quick answer is we've always got to look not only at the process, but also the volume that these processes are able to manage. We are only managing because we are taking up a small percentage, probably about 3% of the water that flows during low flow through the river that bisects the site. So it's a very small amount. We are cleaning between 80 and 100,000 liters of water every 5 to 7 days. We only need about 1,000 liters of that water at the very most at the moment, so we're putting it back as clean water back into the river. But it's highly polluted water. It has nutrient levels which are really elevated. It has bacteria levels, and for the health scientists among you who are probably more aware of CFUs, the counts in colony forming units, passing through the site, we'll get CFUs of about 200,000 or more. And these biofilters are able to reduce that by almost 99%. So very little comes out the other side. Can we do it at scale? And I think that really, in Shahida's question, is the important one. Could we do that at a large scale for a small town? Probably unlikely to do it in the system that we're doing right now. What we try to do here is to reuse that water for a particular purpose. What I think we'd like to be able to see is if there were similar biofilters that were attached to a wastewater treatment work that could then distribute that water for a particular purpose and clean it to the level that I think we're starting to get successful in our treatment works at the Water Hub. Especially in rural areas, is Shahida's other part of the question here too. Could you do it in a rural area? And that probably is where I think there's a lot of scope for it as well, but also for decentralized activities on the periphery of cities, for instance, in informal settlements and right across Africa. And I am in strong partnerships with about 16 other universities in Africa. And we are using this as one of the examples in the work that we're doing to see whether it can be rolled out elsewhere. Any other quick questions? Okay, now let's see if I can put you to work before we come back to some more questions. I want to ask you the question is, what do you think the benefits are of these living labs? And I've used the concept of a living lab, but let's see if I can do that for you. And in the chat room, I'm going to put a short site, copy it onto the chat room. If you can get into that, and let's see if we can do this. Here is a URL, and it goes to Menti. I'm sure you've used it before, but let's just do this one thing. Let's build a word cloud together and see whether we can answer the question in the chat room. Here it is here. And if you get onto Menti, into that code, and I'll share my screen. Hopefully it works this time. And I'll share my screen and let's build this together. And you can put up a word or two. It is a word, and you can put up 3 words, in fact. So let's see if we can do that together. Okay, hope you on the other side there can enter into a little bit of an exercise. I'll share my screen in a moment. Okay, so get onto the site, Menti. Ah, that's great. Thank you. They're coming up over here. Thanks. Couple others, yeah, thank you. We'll just leave it for a minute longer, so get a chance to put in a word or two. Yeah, great. So build on other people's ideas too. What I am seeing is many words coming up here, but I'm not seeing any sense of actually that's probably, although the word is plural, benefits, I'm not seeing a repetition here which strengthens some of the concepts that we are putting up here. In other words, where are the repeats? Where's the replication? What do we see as being some of the key benefits? So if you get a chance, build on others and say, actually, that's what I identify with. Any others? 20 seconds. There's some really useful concepts here, and I think you've really understood, at least as we understand it, each one of these ideas that you put up here are ones that we're beginning to explore in a deeper way now that we're interacting with the site in this way as well.
Kevin, I think Virginia said that she got a split screen and couldn't see. I don't know if it's been resolved.
That's resolved now.
Okay, great.
Okay, you can see the full gamut there. Thank you. Okay, let's leave that aside and just see if there's any more conversations that come out of that. I'll stop my screen from being shared now. Thank you for that. That's great. I saw some really interesting words for us in my experience so far of taking real risks, I think, in managing these sites, because you never quite know where they're going to and what the long-term future for a site like this might be. But certainly from what I saw, your words appearing up here, I don't think we could be answering the questions from one particular discipline. And what's really become exciting is as the questions emerge on the site, we're starting to ask new questions. And increasingly with through people like Aquil and others, starting to ask more health questions. What if these biofilters, for instance, are able to absorb or to treat emerging contaminants in some way? And so the next part of our study is we think we've got the nutrients right. We think some common bacteria, if I can call it very in a perhaps an impolite way, of bacteria such as E. coli, for instance. We've managed to show good evidence for that. Can it now start to reduce pharmaceuticals, antiretrovirals, antibiotics? And there are papers out there in the rest of the world that are starting to work in the same way of nature-based systems, suggesting that pharmaceuticals, and I'm using that very broadly here, because as you know, there are multiple compounds involved in the pharmaceuticals, in antibiotics and so on. But we are starting to see a general reduction of about 90% in general pollutants that are found from pharmaceuticals and so on. So there's one area that I think is of interest in terms of the health sciences side. Sorry, the sound's so bad. I'm hoping that that's not only me, but let me know if others are struggling to hear my voice as well. And then, so the innovation, the multidisciplinary involvement in there. Thank you very much. So the multidisciplinary interest in the study is really interesting. And I think what I found myself doing is really just managing and facilitating that process. And as we start to manage different research proposals, so they're starting to steer us in new directions, and the site becomes almost the glue that holds our research questions together. And the next part of our study, as we move on from water, is involved in hydroponics and aquaponics, and also in soil science. And the key things that I've seen in Europe at the moment, where a lot of our funding is coming from, is from areas of regeneration of soil, of restoration of ecological systems, of energy, or of extraction of resources from energy. And of course, the big one too is how do we treat water without adding more chemicals, and at the same time, how do we remove pharmaceuticals and these emergent pollutants using nature-based systems. And so a lot of our project work is emerging out of that. And you can see from what I've said right now, the links to health and environment are very strong, and can't get into all the detail of that. But as we go through this, new questions are going to emerge. And so from a health perspective, I am so keen to see how we can begin to grow in that area as well. So let me stop for a moment. And in fact, we're into the half an hour, or past the half an hour. Are there any further questions or comments from anyone just having listened to me talk on here, but also seen the material and the way we shared our understanding of living urban labs in this case? The Water Hub essentially is an urban area. Yeah, a couple of hands up. Go for it.
I'm not sure who else had their hand up. If anyone else had their hand up, they can go before me.
Alea, go for it.
Okay, cool. So I'm just thinking back to the facilitating and empowering of the community in terms of skills, the local growers. I understand that there's international funding, and obviously, as we all know, the issue with funding is that it does run out eventually. So is there like the capacity to kind of take on one of the local growers and then get them to do like a skills transfer to the rest of the community if there is someone interested? Because what happens after like the research project is over? That kind of question again.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, we always used to speak about the PhD factor. When the PhD student left, the project collapses, or the money no longer comes its way. So can we do things differently? I've seen in my time so many failed projects, so many projects that are based only or arise funding that is limited, and 2 years later it collapses. One interesting area of, and I've worked a lot in informal settlements, the one area that encourages me is that in the informal settlement of Langrucht, there's a long history of both community-based organizations who have worked in that area. Some have failed and some have walked away from it. But what is left as almost a lasting legacy is a leadership within the informal settlement that I can talk to, that are working with me. We've in great collaboration after a number of years, in fact. And we are working together with quite a strong organization within the informal settlement called the Langrucht Community Project. And it is through that project that I'm hoping we're going to start to see exactly what you've just mentioned, leaders coming out of that who are able to then pass on both the training, the skills, and also continue to attract the money that's required to sustain the living lab in perpetuity. And of course, you don't know what the answer to that is, but it's a really important part of how these living labs become sustainable in the long term. And I think that's the goal. It's more than just the research side of the project. Yeah, thank you. Great question, because what happens afterwards is crucial. Okay, well, if there are no further questions or comments, I think it's time for me to stop and for you to go and get the rest of your lunch. But I just wanted to inspire you a little bit that way. I also want to make contact, so thank you, Aquil, for the invitation, to make contact with you in your space in health sciences, and in particular where we see a very important role between future water and also in public health. Because here is a very strong opportunity for us to be able to expand on the work we're doing both in the science and technology side of the Water Hub, but in particular as to how that begins to empower and to draw people into the activities around the Water Hub itself. It'll take time, but there is certainly opportunity there. So thank you for your time and for questions and your interaction. I enjoyed what you said on the Mentimeter as well. Thank you. Thanks, Aquil. I see you coming back online.
Sorry, Kevin.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. You asked for a question. I just wanted to ask one question. With regard to the Water Hub, is that publicly accessible? Can somebody go and visit there, or do they need to make an appointment, or is it publicly accessible?
So it is not as publicly accessible. We have a manager on site who's readily contactable. So Aquil, through you and I, we can arrange for that to happen. But he does need to be forewarned, and he does take all the precautions and risks of bringing visitors onto the site. So he does need to be forewarned when that happens. But sure, it can easily be visited, and I can also help to set up particular site visits and to take people through the site, but also in the connections too, which links to the informal settlement as well, because that's also part of the conversation.
Yeah. And no, thanks for that. And I also just want to say a last word. Thank you for the presentation. It was a very interesting, exciting presentation, very enjoyable. And also want to thank the others that joined for their input in the presentation. And that was great. Thanks.
Great pleasure. Thank you, Aquil, and good afternoon to all of you.